Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this Advance CTE webinar on supporting career pathways systems through braiding funding. I am Tanisha Hobson, State Policy Manager at Advance CTE. This session is one of many in a series of Advance CTE webinars to support you in learning more about the cutting edge and innovative work we're seeing related to CTE across the country. This session will be recorded and shared on the Advanced CTE website for your reference. If you have any questions at any time, we encourage you to submit them via the Q&A box on your screen. You are also welcome to contribute to the conversation by typing into the chat box directly. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Our objectives through this webinar are to demonstrate how braiding funds and other resources can be leveraged as an effective tool for building a cohesive, flexible, and responsive career preparation ecosystem as called for in our vision, CTE Without Limits. We also want to provide practical examples of shared statewide goals through in-depth examples of cohesive and statewide career pathway systems with our examples of Alabama and Delaware, including how other resources and stakeholders are connected and leveraged to support our learners. Also, we want to share how state leaders can design funding models that direct funding to where it is needed to most support access to equitable CTE career pathways. With us today are three panelists. First, Dan Hinderleiter is a Senior Policy Associate from Advance CTE. He authored the recent resource on braiding funding as part of his work supporting the New Skills Ready Network, an initiative funded generously by JPMorgan Chase, which connects our 6 sites across the country around improving and expanding career pathways through a citywide partnership of a variety of stakeholder groups. He also supports a wide variety of other projects, including leading the modernization efforts of the National Career Clusters Framework. Next, Nick Moore is the director of the Alabama Governor Kay Ivey's Office of Education and Workforce Transformation. He leads the state's career pathways initiatives, coordinating efforts between and across governmental agencies to support high-quality career transformation efforts. Finally, Luke Ryan is the Delaware State CTE Director through the Delaware Department of Education. Among other initiatives, Luke is instrumental in leading Delaware Pathways and Delaware Pathways 2.0, which connect education and workforce development efforts for learners and provide opportunities for youth to gain work experiences aligned with their career goals through a series of high-quality education programs that link to post-secondary education and careers. First up, we will hear from Dan, who will share more information about the recent resource, including recommendations that come as a result of the conversations around this topic. All right, Dan.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tanisha. And also a special thanks to Nick and Luke for participating in the conversation. I do think that Nick and Luke have probably a lot more interesting content to share with you all, so I won't take up too much more time than I need to as part of my presentation. I do hope to provide a lot of good context, however, that's aligned nicely with their presentations. So as Tanisha shared, this webinar comes as part of a recently published resource that was developed through the New Skills Ready Network. This coordinates career pathways expansion and development efforts in 6 cities and is funded through JPMorgan Chase. Education Strategy Group is also a significant partner, and they also helped with the development and review of this publication. And as part of this network, we've developed a series of publications called Strengthening Career Pathways, where we've also featured state-level actions around individual career and academic plans, or ICAPs, aligning pathways to labor market info, and strengthening state and local partnerships. In order to understand how to braid funds, we first really have to understand a general overview of what it is and why it's important. So really at its core, braiding funding is the organization and alignment of 2 or more pots of available funds, regardless of level, to coordinate their use in conjunction with one another. And in this conversation, we're talking about using these funds to specifically support career pathways development, and programming at the systems or at the program level. Because each funding source, especially those from federal legislation, typically has its own accountability and reporting requirements, there is typically a larger coordination of data and additional resources that also come along with this funding, which does create some challenges that we will talk about in a bit. However, as you will often see, the juice is really worth the squeeze when it comes to being able to braid funds, as there are certainly significant benefits that can arise from the effective alignment of funding sources. And so braiding funding and the steps that are required to effectively braid funds are really nicely aligned with the principles of the New Skills Ready Network, which really calls for that cross-sector and cross-partner collaboration and systems building. It also drives some linkages with CTE Without Limits, as Dr. Hobson teed up. That's our recently published vision. It's about a year old. And that calls for a number of different underlying foundational principles, including meaningful public and private partnerships, with those industry partners really deeply invested and involved in the design of career pathway systems. And really those shared statewide goals for career preparation ecosystems, and finally those equitable funding models that really direct the funding to the populations that need it most. So being able to braid those fundings definitely has those connections to a lot of the other work that Advance CTE is connected to. So why do we want to braid funds? So among the benefits I already listed, I do want to share some reasons why you may want to further consider braiding funds together as a way to support those career pathways systems, though the work often does seem daunting. And I'm sure that Nick and Luke will kind of talk a little bit more about the difficulties it takes to really effectively align these systems. Most obviously, one pot of money or a percentage of a pot of money is often not enough to elevate these high quality programs or practices. And in many cases, before a program or system can be funded long term through a state budget or through a legislative action, states really need to see this proof of concept. And this type of funding model can really support a new pilot or expansion of a pilot that already exists in order to lead toward a demonstrable outcome. In many cases, the conversation around funding also leads to the conversations that need to happen to have a consistent and aligned goal. And I'm hopeful that Nick and Luke can talk about what some of those conversations might be. Also, as you examine these different sources of funding, for example, from IDEA funds or using SNAP or TANF dollars, you can often find ways to support students with disabilities, adult CTE learners trying to re-engage in a state workforce system. Other historically marginalized populations require additional supports, as we know. And so we really want to make sure that the funding is being utilized and leveraged in a way that directs those types of populations who haven't historically had the supports needed to succeed in a career pathway system or program. And then finally, this coordination of systems can really demonstrate where there's an overlap in program delivery. And coordinating these systems can limit this duplication and in many cases actually save money through efficient and effective delivery. So while each state and local education system has different specific funds they can leverage to support career pathways, there are quite a few that can be connected statewide to support learners. Since we're all involved in the CTE space, obviously we're familiar with some of the big pieces of federal legislation that can support career pathways systems, including Perkins, WIOA, ESSA. However, there are also some additional federal funding sources, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, SNAP Education and Training, temporary aid for needy families, other federal dollars that can really be leveraged to support career pathways in more innovative ways, like the development of specific accessibility resources or the hiring of special educators. And of course, there are other state, local, and philanthropic or private dollars that can certainly be utilized as part of the connection. And Nick and Luke will really talk about some of the ways that those additional funds can be leveraged as a way to bolster and support the federal dollars that you are already getting. I know for a fact that those, in many cases, those grants can really be looked at as a way to benefit additional kind of one-time funding that can support a lot of this work and be braided into the funding that exists on a more annual basis. So while there are significant benefits to braiding funds together, we also recognize that there are some challenges to doing this work that really limit a state's ability to braid funds. But we will see that there is, opportunity to move past a lot of these barriers. One barrier that I wanted to specifically highlight from this list is this idea of turf. So obviously in the personal and professional worlds, money complicates the relationships that we all have. And people, especially if there is historical or codified ownership over a given area, are often loath to share the funds, people, time, other additional non-financial resources if it means that they may lose their agency over that area. So this is why you'll see as Nick and Luke continue onward that this relationship management is so important to this work of braiding funds, and that without the connections that you really build around this common goal, you'll find that people won't really understand the why of this difficult relational work in order to make sure that funds are being leveraged in the most effective and efficient way. So we did develop some key steps with some underlying actions that really support the braiding of funds across levels, many of which align with the systems that Nick and Luke have put in place in Alabama and Delaware. And the first kind of key step is that you need to align stakeholders and systems around these common goals. So whether this is around a specific outcome, a statewide goal, there needs to be level setting around what is the current state and what is the problem that you are trying to solve. What goal you are trying to achieve, how you will talk about it, who is involved. These are all kind of key questions to ask first before trying to figure out what funding sources are there to support it. Of course, leadership is really at the most important at all levels to really provide this credibility and authority that's needed to ensure that the right decision makers are at the table and that this type of systemic organization is prioritized. From there, you can conduct an analysis of all available funding sources, and in many cases, this does take a lot of time and energy to do. However, it really proves and dividends the work that will come out of it. Because every funding stream has specific allowable uses, it's really important to review these streams for alignment towards your desired purpose or towards that goal that you're trying to achieve. It's also really important to note where there might be flexibilities, especially in the pursuit of supporting historically marginalized groups. We really want to make sure that there's an opportunity to leverage these funds towards populations who really need the resources the most. Even supporting, say, middle school CTE programs is an opportunity to review new or different funding streams that you haven't historically considered to support your CTE programs statewide. You can also recognize where there's expertise around funding in your state. So whether that's a state leader that you can turn to or a local person in your local education agency, these people might be able to point you in the right direction towards other available resources or provide additional guidance around the allowable uses and those flexibilities that I mentioned. And then finally, once you begin linking these streams together, a sustainability plan is really imperative to ensure long-term success for this alignment. So while braiding funds is in and of itself an opportunity for sustainability, you may often lose a strand of your braid due to political transition, a shift in priorities, changing accountability metrics. So in order to work through these barriers, there are some steps you can take. So institutionalizing or codifying career pathways systems really provides the legitimization of a system that might otherwise go the wayside and ensures the long-term inclusion of those types of funding streams. A number of states, including Alabama, have career pathway systems that are connected to other programs and practices through legislation, which ensures this type of long-term alignment. And then, of course, other partners like a work-based learning intermediary, local community-based organizations, philanthropic groups, employers invested in skill development. These groups are often already sold on the benefits of strong community pathways or career pathways systems in their community, and may already have some sort of call to action to leverage funding or programs to support career pathways. And it's important to find those champions and include them in the process to consider really how to overcome some of those financial transitions. So there's my information. Certainly there's a lot more state examples and pieces that are included and incorporated throughout the publication. So I highly recommend you go check out the publication in full. There's also an appendix that goes a lot more in depth about the available provisions within each of those federal pieces of legislation that you could potentially leverage for career pathway systems. So with that, I will turn it back to Tanisha to take us over to Nick.
Thank you, Dan, for that context and foundation that you laid for us in about braiding funding. Next, we will have Nick share information about his office and how the state leverages funds to support cross-agency and statewide goals. Now, over to you, Nick.
Well, thanks so much. And I want to say it is an honor to join you today. So thanks to the whole Advance CTE team, but particularly y'all for facilitating the meeting today, and everybody on the line with us. And know some of you, but look forward to getting to know more of what your state's doing too. So big picture about alignment. In Alabama, we found that it is key for the state to have a big picture, a big goal that everybody's shooting towards, because we all know that in this work, a lot of our agencies are siloed in education, workforce, and human services. And so getting those different agencies excited about a big goal makes the interest in sharing data, braiding funding happen. And it also gives political leaders, policymakers some leverage to be able to get more people to the table, including education, workforce, human service agencies, employers, community-based organizations. So in Alabama, like many states, we set a post-secondary education attainment goal that equals about 60% or 500,000 additional credential workers to our workforce by 2025. But we also have a focus on labor force participation. States that increase their post-secondary attainment see their labor force participation rate also increase. And the reason why in Alabama and a lot of states why our attainment and labor force rate are low is because there are a lot of people facing benefits cliffs and particular barriers to entering education in the workforce. And it's our job, as that third bullet says, to provide a no wrong door approach to the workforce system to help people overcome cliffs and to make sure that we have a really strong transition into self-sufficiency and into a competency-based career pathway that is coupled with supportive services. And so the first big effort that Governor Ivey did to get our public workforce system aligned, and also to get each of these 24 member agencies as part of her big vision for increasing our attainment and labor force participation, is she set up my office, the Office of Education Workforce Transformation. And I have a lot of carrot, no stick by design. It's intended to be a coordinating agency and help to begin thinking about, for example, how to braid funds. So we're sort of putting our money where our mouth is, and my office is funded by Title I, WIOA state set-aside funds, Perkins leadership funds, and then Adult Education Family Literacy Act state leadership funds. And so you could see from this org chart that we also have a team of advisors that are subject matter experts in a particular facet of education, workforce, and human services. And not just, you can see that there's several agencies where there's more than one person represented there. But we want to make sure that we've got a P20 system that is helping support learners and Alabamians all the way from the time that we're working in a two-generation approach with mothers and families to make sure that those first 3 years and then 5 and 8 years are so important. And the ability to braid funds, as was mentioned earlier, through SNAP and TANF, to take an approach that we're working, for example, our first class pre-K program, to make sure that we're working with our youngest learners and their families, as particularly some parents overcome literacy deficits by working with their young children. And so we also have done some very specific things to help my office coordinate, particularly our WIOA and Perkins system. So we included in our 2020 combined WIOA plan Perkins 5 for the first time. And we also got a waiver from DOL to allow in-school youth to get an ITA. And so there's we're trying to expand youth apprenticeship. And so for youth that have some particular barriers and need some additional assistance, ITAs are available for them. We also got an amendment to our ESSA plan that was just approved at the beginning of this month, January, that allows in-school youth to and high school CTE concentrators that complete a program of study to get a college and career readiness indicator. So this is not an example of monetary braiding, but it's an example of using the Perkins 5 plan and the WIOA 2020 plan and the levers that a governor and state education agencies and state workforce boards have at their disposal to braid the intent of these various programs and to make some efficiencies that make it easier to serve multiple special populations. Another example is a dropout prevention program in Alabama called JAG, Jobs for Alabama's Graduates. And we have opened this program up to some funding from WIOA. So we've got some Title I-B WIOA funding that are funding some slots, particularly for youth that would also qualify for WIOA, obviously. And then we're also working with the Alabama Department of Rehab Services to fund some slots for students with IEPs and 504 plans. Part of our strategy of working with youth in particular that may have a disability is to try to help them enter fully inclusive employment and self-sufficiency before they really get onto long-term SSDI, to try to make sure that as they transition from secondary school that they have the post-secondary learning and supports and employment to become fully self-sufficient. And so there are, it really does take gubernatorial leadership, and it's very important for the governor to use the levers available in the 2020 WIOA plan. We're now working on 2022 modifications, so now's a good time that if you felt like you didn't get everything you wanted in your 2020 plan, you could make some modifications now, in particular to make sure that we're aligning programs to serve special populations and historically underrepresented populations. And so you may not, everybody will see it in the slide.
I think we may have lost Nick. Hopefully we can get him connected back soon. But thank you, Nick, for the information and how you told us about how Alabama leverages their funds. So we're going to just transition to Luke, who will share about Delaware pathways and how the state uses.
So, yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right.
Apparently our broadband expansion here in the state is not caught up in the basement. So I apologize for that, but I'll jump back into it and try to make it. So can you see my slides?
Not yet.
Okay, well, let me share that again. I apologize. So we're still living in the COVID environment, even if we don't want to. So, yes. So I was sharing this graphic here. So this shows, and I think it's important for every state to do something like this to figure out what are all the funding streams: SNAP, TANF, Perkins, WIOA, Voc Rehab, and then every one of your special populations. And we've combined our special populations in the WIOA plan with the populations in the Perkins plan because we want to make sure that the combined plan is serving each of those. And we have also aligned our WIOA eligible training provider and credential policy to make sure that all of those are aligned to in-demand jobs in the state. And we've also added a WIOA effectiveness in serving employers measure that really gets past one of the kind of nefarious holes in the WIOA law, which is if you just kind of sit there and wait for people to walk in the one-stop system, you could serve 9 out of 10 people really well and look like you're doing something. And so we realized that if we want to get our labor force participation rate up, we have to have a more evangelical outreach strategy, not in a religious sense, but in the sense that we got to go out and find people where they are and have a segmented marketing approach. So the numerator, how many people you serve, the denominators, how many are in each of those populations. And so I got at this a little bit, but so for each of those 14 discrete populations in our WIOA plan, we've broken that down annually. And so that each year in each of our 7 regions, we know how many people need to be served to keep us on track towards our big goal. And braiding funding really becomes a major topic at this stage because people want to know, how do we dig deeper? How do we develop strategies to maximize dollars available to serve each population? And so this gets a little bit at our 2-pronged career pathway model, and I'm going to speed through this, but just to make the point that 50 years ago, most people just needed a high school diploma for their job. Now we know that post-secondary learning is a must just for about every job that has come online in the last 10 years. That will continue to accelerate. But we also know that we can create a sequence of stackable credentials that begin with non-degree programs to democratize access to new modalities of learning, and new era CTE programs in particular at the secondary and post-secondary level are a way to do that using credentials of value as a connecting currency. And so this is an example of our 2-pronged career pathway model that connects secondary CTE, post-secondary CTE, Title I and IV with adult basic education to provide a compressed path into post-secondary learning and employment for youth, and opens it up a little bit for adults so that we have multiple points of entry and exit, and that we have multiple opportunities to get a progressive wage increase along a career pathway. And so it's also important to have a demand-driven, competency-based system that truly is responsive to business and industry needs. So we've codified a system called the ACCP for identifying our in-demand jobs, competency models, pathways, and credentials of value linked to those jobs, and breaking it down, not just looking at raw openings, but also looking at qualitative factors to make sure that people are on a path to self-sufficiency. So this is the methodology that we use, and I won't get too much into this, but we do develop each job on the list into a competency model like this, and it breaks the skills down to really to be the DNA of this in-demand job. And if anybody wants to talk with me more about this offline, happy to. And we also form these into dynamic career pathways so that some of the jobs that didn't make the cut on our list of in-demand jobs still have an opportunity to be part of a pathway as an opportunity occupation. So those are just a couple of examples of what Governor Ivey's doing to braid funding in the state of Alabama in partnership with our Perkins agencies, state WIOA boards, and happy to address any further questions. Thank you. And sorry for the disruption.
No problem. Thank you so much, Nick, for giving us that information on how Alabama is leveraging those funds. Next, we will transition to Luke, who will hear about Delaware pathways and how the state uses braided funding to ensure longevity.
All right, good afternoon. I think you can see my slides, is that right?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So my name is Luke Ryan. I'm the Director for Career and Technical Education with the Delaware Department of Education. It is an awesome opportunity to spend some time with you this afternoon. So first, thank you. All right, in terms of our time today, we're going to go through a couple of different things. So the first is I'll give you a little background on Delaware and our Delaware pathway strategy. We'll also talk about the investment model and impact model to date. I'll kind of spend the bulk of my time then around our braided funding strategy, our phase 2 work, which we refer to as Pathways 2.0, and then the model that exists financially around the implementation of that initiative. So to start, just a little context on Delaware. So this will give you a kind of a demographic composition of students in our state, as well as some of the system actors, so our community college system, our state workforce board, how we organize and centralize data, as well as the types of schools that exist within the system. The reason that I share this slide is the way that we think about Delaware, the way that I think about Delaware, is there are lessons that apply both at the system level and at the regional level. So for folks on the audience today who are state actors, many of the same state systems exist in your locality and are your colleagues at the state level. If you're a local or regional actor, many of the same types of organizations and partnerships that we've created also exist locally. So this is my just kind of shameless way of saying that I think our model can be replicated both at the state and at the regional level. So this will give you, again, some semblance of Delaware. So like Nick, our strategy starts with a top line metric. So essentially we are seeking to upskill our workforce. So we're seeking to ensure that 65% of our workforce holds a professional certificate or degree by the year of 2025, which matches the percent of the labor market that requires that level of experience and skill. Our strategic plan is linked in the left. There are 6 actors that take a leadership role in the implementation of that plan. The first is my office, the Department of Education, is really around our systems orientation. The second is really our community college system. And specifically, we created a work-based learning intermediary within our community college system to live at the intersection of our K-12 and post-secondary systems and our labor market, as well as our economic development efforts. The third area is our Department of Labor. This is really around coordination of supports and services for individuals with barriers to employment, as well as a way in which we centralize reporting, outreach to communities, and data collection. The fourth area is the way that we organize ourselves financially and braid resources. So one of our core strategic objectives is around our development. So how do we fiscally develop solutions? And then secondly, how do we braid financial resources across different system actors? And then the last part is really around the employer ownership and direction of our system, which we manage through our state workforce board. So our system then has 3 kind of core tenets of our systems model. So the first are high quality educational experiences. So this is the marriage of academic and technical preparation and a rigorous career pathway for youth and adult learners. The second is the marriage of experience. So it's the ability to apply within the job site and to build relationships and networks with employers. And then the third area is around our coordinated system of supports. So this is everything from empowering our educators to be advocates for young people and adults that we serve, in addition to things like coordinated systems. So an example here is we have an activity that we refer to as the pipeline for students with disabilities. This is a 4-part agency partnership where we're coordinating financial resources from 5 different federal programs to support pre-employment transition services for youth. So it's both systems organization as well as the empowerment of adults within our system to better support students and lift student voice. And collectively, we think that leads to opportunities. So our work, or this slide, so I'll just do a quick orientation to this slide. So on the top bar, it's meant to represent kind of the financial investments that have been made over time and kind of set the stage for kind of the braided funding strategy that we've launched over this last year. And then on the bottom, the intent is to show impact. That impact represents types of programming, types of partnerships, as well as student outcomes as it relates to thinking a little bit more directly and a little bit more systemically. So in the top, the initial investment was about $150,000. DBERC is the Delaware Business Roundtable for Education Committee. So it's a group of private employers that wanted to see some type of shift in terms of the connection or blurring between our K-12 post-secondary and workforce systems. Rodell, as you'll see from the slide previously, is a supporter. It's a private philanthropic organization in the state. And then our governor at the time, Governor Jack Markell. So kind of fast forward a couple years, we were able to leverage a couple national grants, specifically through JP Morgan Chase as well as Bloomberg Foundation. And then the $20 million that exists around braiding are some of the things that Nick mentioned previously. So we really focused around people, so population. So youth, adults, in-school youth, out-of-school youth, incumbent worker, dislocated worker. And we moved programming around people versus maintaining programs as separate silos. So this is everything from braiding our secondary and post-secondary CTE budgets to WIO Title I, Title II, and Title IV services, to the integration of supports like Medicaid and other forms of health and social service programs through our DHSS office, to kind of you name it. It also links IDEA funds, it also links ESSA funds, all of those types of things. And then kind of fast forward to today, we just closed our last fundraising kind of development cycle, where we raised a little more than $24 million to support our next phase of work, which I'll talk about here in a minute. In the bottom, we had an idea around how we could create a career pathway system. That initial concept was piloted in 2015. Again, fast forward a couple years, we had a pretty aggressive growth model around that, where we were serving at that time about 9,000 youth through 14 different career pathway programs. There were a number of employers involved, a number of employer associations involved. Fast forward to today, we're serving a little over 55% of all youth in grades 9 through 12 in our implementation strategy. There are more than 500 employers involved. And to date, we've increased student outcomes in terms of college and career readiness, so that this is the number of youth who exit high school having completed advanced coursework while still in high school by 25%, which is great. So then let's jump down to what we've learned. So I'm going to kind of go in buckets, and then this is an attempt to kind of phrase or kind of paraphrase our investments in this next phase. So we have essentially, we run career pathway programs in 98% of all high schools across the state. It is the majority education system for students in grades 9 through 12. But what we find is that not every young person enters high school having a sense of who they are in terms of their self-identity, their identity within the community, and their future occupational identity. So we really feel it's incumbent to spend more time in helping youth to build social emotional skill sets, dispositions, and a sense of self in terms of their middle grades, college and career exposure. The other thing that we had learned quite a bit is that our post-secondary system is not nearly as permeable as we would like. So the ability for credentials to stack, degrees to connect, credit for prior learning policy, all of those things were essential barriers to people continuing their education in a way that reflected their education and career goals. If I look in that second bucket, employer ownership is still essential. So it's an area where we're kind of doubling down. The other component of this is we want to integrate our education and work models. So things like registered apprenticeship, the expansion of youth apprenticeship models are core to how we continue to blur the lines between education systems and our labor market. And then in the third bucket, there are really kind of two big takeaways. So the first is, for innovation to occur, we have to have a strategy around design innovation. So there are a couple things that we're moving towards funding in this next phase of work, like a delivery unit. And then the second part of this is that our work has to be driven by a shared research agenda across these organizations and across the state. So we are positioning kind of core research questions within each kind of frame of our work strategy so that we can continue to learn and we can continue to grow and we can develop public policy that is responsible or reflective of our research policy. All right. And then I think probably the most interesting slide for this conversation is our $24 million braided funding strategy. So this is intended to showcase work alongside of different funders. So again, an orientation to this slide is, if you look across the x-axis, you have the different types of funders who are each contributing dollars to this next phase of work. So organizations like Bloomberg, Walton, ASA all represent private foundations. We were fortunate to receive 2 federal grants, one through the U.S. Department of Labor, which is a youth employment grant, or youth apprenticeship grant, excuse me. And then the second through the IES, or the U.S. Department of Ed, which is a research grant focused on CTE. We received a couple other private grants. You'll see some CTE dollars, specifically our reserve funds for both secondary and post-secondary allocated in this effort. There was a private investment from DuPont and Discovery Education, and then there are 2 federal stimulus resources, so ESSER funds as well as GEAR funds. So dollars leveraged through the Department of Education and dollars leveraged through the Office of Governor John Carney. So that is our x-axis and the types of braided funds that we're using to put in motion our 2.0 strategy. And then down the left, or in the y-axis, you essentially see the different types of work strategies that we intend to take on. So previously referenced is we are going to expand our career pathway strategy into middle grades. You can kind of see that there is a little over $4 million that's allocated to support this work product. And then if you look at just who's kind of checked off, you can see how different resources are leveraged across different funders to support that aggregate funding strategy. And then this is essentially how we are braiding, again, these resources from these 11 or 12 different funders to produce our work product over the next several years. And then again, on the y-axis, you see different activities that we intend to fund, the relative scale of that investment, and then the types of funders who have had interest or expressed dollars in terms of supporting that work. All right. So with that, I think here's my contact information. So, if you want to follow up or if you have questions or anything along those lines, feel free to shoot me an email. Happy to do that. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I think I'm turning it back over.
All right. Thank you so much, Luke, for adding context related to how Delaware is braiding funds for sustainability and longevity at both the state and regional levels. We will now transition to a short Q&A session with our panelists. As we shared earlier, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box. And the first question is to you, Luke. Does that mean that you will have one work-based learning point of contact for secondary and post-secondary, or is there a team of people?
Yes, so the intent of our work-based learning intermediary is to put structure around how schools, our K-12 institutions, and how our higher education partners work together. So essentially, when we're recruiting employers, employers have different hiring needs. So if they need to recruit someone who has a degree versus someone who has a credential, we want to essentially meet that demand. The other recognition is that this takes more than one person. So if you want to recruit employers effectively, you actually have to have a strategy around this. Local school systems may be more well positioned to recruit employers within their geographic boundaries, or mom and pop's small business that's kind of in their immediate community. But if you're trying to recruit a large employer, an employer that employs 25,000, 30,000, 45,000 people, there's likely more than one point of contact that can be leveraged. And there really needs to be a recruitment strategy that's a little bit more holistic to recruit a major employer in a given state or in a given region, where that relationship can be shared across more than one training provider.
Right, thank you. There's another question asking more about impact data and collection. So the question is, how does braided funding impact data collection and analysis across state and local workforce boards? And if there are any other parties involved? In addition to that, were there any significant data infrastructure changes?
I'll take that and say that we concurrently built out a state longitudinal data system during the process, the other things I described today. And getting to some longitudinal questions, I think, also can help generate interest in braiding funding, because it gets more at the why. And sometimes we're only focused on the how, although I will say the how is important. And I should have said earlier, I always like to preface my comments about braiding funding with there's a big difference between braiding and blending funding. And the most important thing about braiding funding is not going to jail. So I would always recommend seeking legal counsel to make sure that we're really understanding the nuances of braiding versus blending and what can go with what.
So what I would add is essentially your goalposts should be the same across organizations. So Nick made some comments earlier about state development of a combined state plan. We do the same thing in Delaware. We have a combined plan that includes, right, Perkins as well as WIOA funded programs and some other programs as well. One of the big challenges is when we define populations, are we actually talking about the same people? When we talk about demographic compositions of a given population, are we in fact talking about the same people? And that has to be discussed. The other component that needs to be discussed is when we talk about a placement outcome or some type of shared metric that exists across federal and state programs, do we actually mean the same thing when we're reporting against that definition? And places like combined plans are wonderful places to create shared accountability models across multiple federal programs, which will likely drive quite a bit of the data collection that exists at the state level. So that is the best place to start in terms of where you think about, right, being on the same page in terms of what you report and what you do.
And I think, hold on, I think even besides at the state level, there was a question in the chat about doing this at the regional or the district level. And even though the Perkins plans and the WIOA plans are statewide plans, there's certainly an opportunity to do this level of planning and alignment, data structuring at the regional and local level as well, to really ensure that you're collecting the funds and the allowable uses for those funds in a way that can create an aligned and cohesive system within your local level. And I'm not sure if Nick or Luke, either of you has particular experience in assisting with that type of alignment at the regional level, but maybe one of you could speak to that as well.
Yeah, so one example, and let's use WIOA youth dollars. So to Nick's earlier comments, for Title I of WIOA, there are dollars that exist for both in-school and out-of-school youth, but the young person has to essentially qualify for those dollars. So there are a certain number of barriers that the individual needs to have represented in their life in order to qualify for that financial assistance. The point here is that many of anyone from a locality, the relationship can exist between your local workforce board and a community college or a K-12 institution in your locality. And in-school dollars under WIOA Title I are designed to support youth who are in school today in terms of graduation rate and placement beyond graduation. So there are likely ways in which you can braid dollars locally to support in-school youth between, right, K-12 higher ed and your local workforce board. And all it requires is a conversation. These dollars are designed to be kind of implemented in this way. And providers likely need if you're on the K-12 side, providers likely need the information that you possess in order to more easily qualify youth for these services. So it's a very reciprocal relationship.
And I'll just tag on a line or two onto what Luke mentioned there. At the regional level, training and cross-training is very important. It's easy for a bureaucrat like me in the dungeon down in the Capitol to churn out memos and strategies. Somebody's got to implement that. And a great way to demoralize people is come up with some big complicated endeavor and not really explain how we want it to happen. So for example, on that waiver on the ITAs, it's really complicated to get in-school youth enrolled in an ITA if you don't have a strong relationship with the one-stop center and career coaches in schools. And so if it's just left to the parent and the student to find their way into the one-stop, sometimes they'll get one of these things, well, Wagner pies are over there and Title I over there. So it's got to be really intentional about supporting people in that process, making a human-centered design and not making people have to deal with vagaries of 20 or 30 different agencies.
All right, as we're drawing close to our time, I want to ask this final question. Do you find that there is a lot of crossover in the numbers when looking at different groups? So are there people represented in more than one group? For example, a person with a disability who can also be listed as a caregiver?
Yeah, I mean, so to Nick's point, this is about people. It's not about federal programs or state programs. It's around how do you serve communities well. And you have to understand, I think, and be proximate to the communities that you serve. So to the comment around, data collection and where people appear in different types of data collection models, yes, there is some crossover. There's also bias in how we collect data. So it's important to understand where systems have been inequitable, where bias exists within these systems, either through data collection or through just understanding the community. And I think, if you take that kind of human-centered approach that Nick mentioned, there are ways in which you can likely use that information system to better serve a community, to better advocate for groups of individuals who've been historically marginalized, and to center equity in this work much more directly.
All right, thank you all again. Thank you to our panelists and our audience today for joining us for our webinar. After leaving this meeting, please complete the quick evaluation that will pop up in your web browser. We want to make sure that this series is meeting your needs. And as mentioned, a recording of this call will be posted to the Advance CTE website and YouTube channel for your reference. And registration is open for our next webinar on our Year in Review annual aggregation of state level policy on February 15th at 1 p.m. We hope that you will join us for that information and that webinar as well. A link to the registration for that event is now going to be posted in the chat box. Again, thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you all have a great afternoon, and we will see you again soon.